Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Is it too early to serve up a holiday feast? The answer to that is yes, precisely a week away from Thanksgiving, but it is never too early to carve up and share what sports entrees I've got prepped and ready to go, as this is the J Reels Podcast with your host, J Reels. For my first timers, welcome aboard, and for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And as we get set for week 12, which will raise the curtain tonight in Cleveland with my Pittsburgh Steelers, and I'll get to that in a minute, and I don't really feel too good about this game, and I'll explain why just in a little while. But as far as what has taken place over the course of these last few days between Monday and today, well, if you're a New York football fan, and I understand that your seasons were probably over, think about this. From the time that the World Series was about to be completed, and even maybe go back to the National League Championship Series when the Mets were still alive, you could argue that both the Jets and Giants seasons were already up in smoke, that they were done, kaput, finished. And that is just ominous to think that their season was over then, but here we are now a month later, and we could certainly put to rest anything that has to do with the football teams. And unfortunately, they made a lot of news this week, and I'll start off with the Jets. If you listen to the podcast on Monday, I talked about how the Jet season has become a complete disaster, arguably the worst season in franchise history. And people could say, well, wait, J Reels, remember in 96 when Rich Kotite led the Jets to a 1-15 season with Neil O'Donnell as their quarterback? And yes, that's as low and as bad as it gets. But the expectations going into the season with everything that transpired last season, 4 plays into their year where Aaron Rodgers laid on the MetLife turf Monday night, September 11th, against the Buffalo Bills, and how their season just went up in smoke even at that point. And now here it was, him being healthy and maybe not 100% from a psychological and maybe even spiritual standpoint, because as we've seen Aaron Rodgers throughout the course of the year, he has not played well. He has certainly played subpar to the MVP caliber that he has shown throughout the course of his career. And for just that, as well as the coach getting fired, on top of now the GM and a one Joe Douglas getting the axe. And as I mentioned on my YouTube channel the other day, at J Reels, of course, I said to myself and to everybody out there, why now? But at the same time, why not? Why now is because for 11 games into their season, and with the bye this coming week, maybe it was the timing for them to pull the plug on the Joe Douglas era. But it's not as if the higher-ups and the front office, they're going to be making any moves from now until you get to February, because the trade deadline, as we know, is come and gone. There isn't any way, shape, or form that the GM is going to have any influence on this team from now until the end of the season. And I get it, since they got rid of Robert Saleh after the London trip to play the Vikings, and we saw how that unfolded, to now, 5-6 weeks later, to say, let's just give him his walking papers. All right, so now you're starting to clean house here, and now it's just a matter of personnel once you get to pretty much February, because I'm not going to think that the Jets are going to make any type of harsh or rash decisions once the season concludes there, the first weekend of January. But yes, people could say, all right, well, they could certainly take a look of the land to see if they could pluck a GM or an assistant from some other team, but why do that now? And yes, they could scour the league from all of the 31 teams to kind of pick and choose, or maybe have their eyes set on somebody. But why not just wait to the end of the season? There's 6 games left. Yes, there is a bye, but it's not as if Joe Douglas is going to make any moves or have any influence on this team throughout the rest of the year, so they just should have had him write it out. So that's why I say why now. But then, of course, the flip side of that is why not? The team's going nowhere. The coach is already gone. Let's just get rid of the GM, which happened, and then now let's see if we could start anew. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with the owner, Woody Johnson, considering the president-elect and what he did when he came aboard the first time around back in 2016, how he appointed Woody Johnson ambassador of UK, and there is a possibility that that may happen again. And I would think that Woody Johnson's going to want to see this whole thing through without question. But knowing that the GM and coach are gone, And now we can probably look as a Jet fan to say, all right, who's going to be out next? Is it going to be Aaron Rodgers? What are you going to do about Devontae Adams? Do we even entertain or even think that the new front office, whomever that may be, would they trade Sauce Gardner? Would they trade Garrett Wilson? Would they do anything to revamp this whole team? Because as I mentioned Monday, and I'll say now, it's time for them to back up the truck. And I understand you're not going to get rid of Sauce Gardner for a 5th-round pick or Garrett Wilson for a bag of footballs. But right now, this is as crucial and critical of an organizational standpoint to kind of get themselves back on track, whether that means they somehow, some way get a quarterback from another team, or if there is a free agent, I couldn't even tell you off the top of my head who the quarterback free agents are, like last year where you saw Kirk Cousins, he being the top guy. Are the Jets going to go after a guy like that if there is somebody like that on the market? Or are they going to have to get the right people here to take a look at what's happening in college? And I get it, wherever the Jets, wherever they may land as far as the draft is concerned, who knows? Do you want to take Cam Ward? Are you thinking about Shedeur Sanders? Now, you're going to have to be somewhere at least in the top 4, depending on where the draft order breaks down, because we know Jacksonville's probably going to be up there, and they're not going to select a quarterback. But we figured that the Giants are going to be up there, and you know they're going to have a quarterback certainly zeroed in on, whomever that may be. And I'll get to the Giants in a second. But as far as the Jets go, they need to just clean house, open the windows, get all the bad air out and the fresh air in. And we all understand that it starts from the top with Woody Johnson. But hopefully he won't be meddling, as you heard these reports here recently, that whether jokingly or not, that after that game in London to where the Jets lost to the Vikings, he made a mention, and it has been reported by The Athletic, on him saying maybe we should bench Aaron Rodgers. Now, whether you're kidding or not, that shouldn't come out of the owner's mouth. I get it that you're paying this man a fortune, as well as making all these different moves throughout the course of the year, whether it's bringing in Devontae Adams there right before the deadline, Hassan Reddick finally getting him on the dotted line. And yes, your season has been out to sea for a few weeks now. So you're the owner, and you certainly have plenty of rights to say what you want about your team. But considering this aging quarterback who is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, even if you kid about that, I'm sure that the quarterback is not going to sit well with that. And who knows where he's going to go at the end of this year, which, if you ask me, if there's going to be a new regime, coaching staff, etc., I would think that Rodgers is going to want out. And if he latches on to another team, a team that has playoff or even Super Bowl aspirations, then God bless him. But right now, that's not the time to even dissect that. But one more time, I can't say it any more clearly than I have. They need to start over. And I get it. People are going to say, well, bring Rodgers back with the new regime. At least you'll be competitive next year. How do you know that? Rodgers has been skittish in the pocket. He's a guy that certainly doesn't have the same mobility that he once did. And granted, he's going to be 41 in 2 weeks. So how could you even think to bring him back, knowing that, all right, you have Devontae Adams, and that's going to be a big question mark. And even though he said yesterday that he wants to stick around, he wants to be a part of this organization. But if Rodgers is not going to be here, does Devontae Adams say, you know what, I want out too? Now, give him credit, because remember, that whole scenario in Green Bay where he left before Rodgers did by going to Las Vegas, and who knows, maybe he will think about maybe sticking around, even if the tea leaves have been read and the writing's on the wall where Rodgers is going to be jettisoned here with the new regime that's going to come in. But it's just an absolute mess there in Florham Park. The Jets have been just a flat-out disaster, and it's a shame because they've tried so many different ways when it comes to whether drafting quarterbacks, if your name is Sam Darnold, obviously Zach Wilson, and even with the veteran quarterbacks, whether your name is Aaron Rodgers or even a guy like Ryan Fitzpatrick, for that matter, who had a successful season there with Todd Bowles back in 2015, but that didn't even end in a playoff berth as they fizzled in Buffalo in that final game of the season where Rex Ryan was the coach. So, you know, it was good to stick it to him, or stick it to them, I should say, the Jets. And one more time, this team, no matter how they try to structure it, no matter what they try to do, whether it's bringing in the aging quarterback or even Brett Favre, let me throw him in the mix too, another Green Bay legend who came here and in 1 year did not pan out, even though they were 8-3 and ended up 9-7 and outside looking in as far as the playoffs go. And they tried all these different measures, and it's come to absolute squat. So that's what you have there with the Jets. We will certainly keep an eye and fingers on the pulse as to what they're going to do. Now, I don't think they're going to hire a GM here between now and the end of the season. If they do, I'd be shocked unless, again, they have their eyes set on somebody and maybe if they could get some discussions, permission to speak to those people. But they're not going to do that in season with the teams that are still operating, even if it's a team that is far from the playoff picture, that I'm sure they're not going to be knocking on the door or picking up the phone and say, hey, can we speak to this guy to be the GM? I know stranger things have happened. Who knows? Teams will be like, yeah, why not? Who cares? But as far as the Jets go, just an unmitigated disaster. And the same can be said on the other side of the hall at MetLife Stadium, where the Giants this week have demoted their starting quarterback, Daniel Jones, and a lot of it has to do with that $23 million insurance protection to where, let's say if Daniel Jones played the rest of this year, and let's say if he got hurt, and remember last year he had that ACL injury, to where the Giants will owe him $23 million. And that's similar to, if you recall, last year Russell Wilson had a $37 million insurance deal where Sean Payton, the head coach, canned him for the last 2 games because they figured, there's no way that I'm going to want to have this guy, A, back on the team next year, as we see he's in Pittsburgh, and B, that if it just so happens that if he does get hurt and then they're going to owe him this money, granted that they had to give him dead cap money as it was to begin with because the Steelers paid $1.2 million just for his services this year, where the Broncos are footing the bill for the rest. But at the same time, they didn't want to have to roll the dice to have him play those last 2 games, get hurt, and then that was going to be on the books for them this year when it comes to that insurance policy. So that's what you have there with Daniel Jones. But the thing is, not only was he demoted in the pecking order, but he was all the way down to the bottom to the point where the second string quarterback, which would have been Drew Lock, he got overlooked for Tommy DeVito. Now, Tommy DeVito last year, if you're under a rock, especially here in these parts where I live in New York, a guy that was here, born and raised here in New Jersey, got his shot last year, had a little bit of success to the point where he got his nickname Tommy Cutlets and was 3-3 as a starter, actually played pretty well. Not that he was lighting the world on fire, but for a guy that was pretty much, if you want to call him the Rocky Balboa of the NFL, a guy that was a big-time underdog, a guy that, all right, made an NFL roster, but we never thought that he was going to have or get any playing time. But because of what happened last year with Daniel Jones and with Tyrod Taylor being in and out of the lineup, here's where you had the scenario for DeVito to come in, and he actually had some success. Now, I don't know if that's going to be duplicated. Certainly, he's tempered it a lot based on a lot of the things that he said over the last couple of days, saying, yes, last year, the attention and the fame, and right, I understand it got out of hand, but this is strictly about football. This is not about appearances. This is not about notoriety. This is not about anything but just trying to go out there and win a game on Sunday. And kudos to him. So let's see what's going to happen. I don't think he's going to be the quarterback of the future. We know that they're going to be pretty much high on the draft order when it's all said and done, barring a little bit of a winning streak here. But the football seasons for both the Jets and Giants, I mean, you couldn't have scripted it any worse. And it has been terrible here for quite some time. I mean, think about this. The Jets have not made the postseason since 2010. Their last appearance was in the AFC Championship game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. That was it. Since then, it has been a barren wasteland for this organization. And it's not even a thing where they've come close to the playoffs other than 2015 that I mentioned a short time ago with Todd Bowles and Ryan Fitzpatrick. This team has been just out in the wilderness. And the same can be said for the Giants. Now, granted that they won a Super Bowl in 2011, but since that time, they've had a couple of playoff appearances where they lost in Green Bay. That was the whole Boatgate scenario with Victor Cruz and Odell Beckham Jr., to the point where they took the day off at the end of the regular season where they went down to Miami, and for whatever the reason, they thought that that was a great idea. Beckham, I believe he already had 4 catches for 32 yards. The Giants were outplayed, outclassed, and outcoached, and that was under Ben McAdoo. And then a couple of years ago where they had some success winning a game in Minnesota and then going to Philadelphia in the divisional round, and they got their doors blown off. That is the only glimmer of hope over the last now 13 years, if you're a Giant fan, that they were able to have something to hang their hats on. Other than that, again, wilderness, barren wasteland, or as I was going to say, tumbleweeds. I was going to say Timberwolves. Tumbleweeds just all over the parking lots there of MetLife Stadium, as you've had absolutely nothing going on in the tri-state area, or in particular East Rutherford, New Jersey, when it comes to these football teams. And guess what? Another season down in the dumps, dumpster fire, just all out catastrophic when it comes to the New York Football Giants and Gang Green and the Jets. And one more time, and I said this weeks ago, check the receipts on that. If I'm the ownership, and granted it's been 1 year, and I know they kind of tweaked their uniforms over the last couple of years to kind of look like the Jets of the mid-70s and the 80s, go back to the old uniforms, because every time I look at those Jet green and white uniforms without the stripes on the side, I mean, they do have the striping, but the vintage Jet uniforms that were worn when they won in Super Bowl III, and then later on, the Vinny and the Jet teams of the late 90s when they went back to those throwbacks, go back to those uniforms, because the ones that I'm watching here, oh my God, they are eyesores and they are just reminiscent of really some lean years there in Jet history. So that's what I have there. And as far as week 12, yes, tonight, Pittsburgh in Cleveland, Amazon Prime will start us off. And I said this last week, Thursday, check those receipts, and even on Monday. Now, this isn't to say or throw a reverse jinx or even jinx the Steelers here, because they are 8-2 atop the AFC North, currently third in the AFC as far as the pecking order, where right now it's currently Kansas City, Buffalo. I understand Buffalo beat Kansas City, but because Kansas City's 9-1, Buffalo 9-2, there's still a half game behind them as far as the overall AFC standings. And then with the Steelers there, right behind them at 8-2. But the one thing, after that win on Sunday against the Ravens, and as we all know, those games are the type of games where the next day it's the Epsom salt, it's the cold plunge, it's everything, the sauna, you name it, just to kind of get all of the soreness out of your body. And with a 3-day turnaround to get to tonight against a Cleveland Brown team that I actually picked as an over, which is, ugh. And maybe I'll get to my over-unders in a little bit. But for the Browns, this is going to be their Super Bowl. They have nothing to lose. And yes, they did beat the Ravens earlier this year, if you recall. Granted that Kyle Hamilton had a game-sealing interception go right through his hands and arms. But this is a dangerous game. This is the quintessential letdown game. Do I think it's going to happen? More so than not. I will say this, because again, coming off of that emotional game against the Ravens and now having to gear up and play in Cleveland, as I'm sure you're probably going to have a smattering of empty seats. I know a lot of Steelers fans will probably make the trip. It's just a 2-hour car ride from Pittsburgh. But one more time, this is probably going to be the last game on the schedule in their building that's going to be meaningful for the Cleveland Browns. So you know they're going to come out in full force. And I would think if this is going to be a game where it's 13-10, fourth quarter, where the Steelers are down by 3, and here's Jameis Winston marching down the field to try to punch it in to take the lead late in the game, would I be surprised? Absolutely not. So we'll see what's going to happen there, as that will start us off. Now, you do have 6 teams that have byes, including the Jets, as I mentioned: Falcons, Bills, Bengals, Saints, and Jacksonville. So you have a couple of teams that, contention, Buffalo, even Atlanta for that matter, on a lesser degree. But then you have New Orleans, the Jets, Jacksonville. So you have teams, even Cincinnati for that matter, that certainly you're not going to miss this week. But the schedule overall, not a good one. Minnesota at Chicago, Detroit at Indy, New England at Miami, Tampa at the Giants. And I get it, you have games that teams are going to be involved as far as whether it's the playoff hunt, fringe playoff teams, etc., like Indianapolis for that matter. I don't even want to say Chicago right now because they're in a free fall. Tampa, I know that they've been trying to regroup here coming out of a bye. Let's see how they do. Dallas at Washington. Let's see if Washington can pick up the pieces after losing 2 straight. Kansas City at Carolina. No thanks. Denver at Vegas. I'll pass. San Francisco at Green Bay. That's a game, 425 Fox, where I'm sure you're going to get Burkhardt and Brady. That's a game to keep an eye on, especially with the Niners, as their season right now is teetering. Arizona at Seattle. Decent game. And then Philadelphia at Los Angeles, the Rams, that is. Decent Sunday night game. Let's see what the Rams are going to do to kind of keep themselves afloat there in the NFC West. Remind you that they're only a game behind the Cardinals for the division. And in fact, San Francisco, the Rams, and Seattle all at 5-5. Arizona's at 6-4. So they're all a game behind. But Arizona is 2-0 in the division by beating the Rams as well as the Niners. So you got to keep that in mind. So this is a big game for the Cardinals, even bigger for the Seahawks, because if they're going to make any noise out west, they need this game in the worst way. They've already lost to the Rams. They've already lost to the 49ers, even though they beat the 49ers this past week, but they're going to need to rack up division wins, and now's the time to do so against a Cardinal team, surprisingly, that's in first place by themselves. And even though with Arizona, if they win this game, they'll be 3-0 in the division. And let's see what happens with San Francisco and Green Bay and even Philly at LA. They could actually have a 2-game lead by the time we conclude Sunday night at around 11:30, whether or not the Eagles could beat the Rams and Green Bay could beat San Francisco. If Arizona takes care of business, they'll in essence have a 2.5-game lead in the division and will really be in good shape throughout the rest of the way. And then the Monday night game is Baltimore at LA. Yes, the other team, the Chargers, and which is a big game if you ask me for the Chargers, because the Ravens, they're going to have to sit on that game from last Sunday against Pittsburgh. They have the extra day, and then they're going to go to Southern California where the Chargers are riding high, playing well. We saw what they did there Sunday night against the Bengals. They almost squandered a, 21-point lead. Actually, yes, it was 21 points, but they were able to hang on. They won the game. And now let's see if this Charger team is going to mean business, because they've fared pretty well this year against certain teams. And not to say that Baltimore is an upper echelon team. They do play like that offensively at times, but they already have 4 losses. They are a far cry from last year's team, which was a 1 seed and the best in the AFC. But I want to see how the Chargers stack up against this team, because if Baltimore goes in there and they win 34-20 and Derrick Henry rushes for 182 yards, and Lamar Jackson is 20 for 27 for 250 and 2 touchdowns, then to me, the Chargers are going to be a fake team. I'm sorry, if it's competitive and they lose by a field goal at the end or a late touchdown, maybe I'll fault the defense, but all right, offense played well, and who knows, maybe come January, if they do qualify, they may have an opportunity to where they could surprise some people and maybe even go on a run. But if they lose bad here, to me, that's not going to sit well as a fan, thinking that the Chargers could be a sneaky team, maybe even a dark horse team in the AFC. But if they lose that game badly, I'll certainly think differently about this Charger team, even with the head coach and their quarterback. But that's what you have there with the NFL for a week number 12. Quickly, let me get to the list of first-time Hall of Fame nominees, which was just released there a couple days ago. Headlined by Eli Manning. The other first-timers are Luke Kuechly, Terrell Suggs, Adam Vinatieri, Earl Thomas, and James Harrison. Then, of course, you have the Steve Smiths, the Hines Ward, the Reggie Waynes, a lot of wide receivers on that list, which when we get down the road, we'll talk about it further. Now, these aren't set in stone. They're going to have to go through the committee. They'll pare it down to 12. I believe there's 25 on the list now. And then when you get to the week of the Super Bowl, a couple of days prior to, they'll announce who are the finalists. Well, they'll announce the finalists before that, and then they're going to announce who will be enshrined in Canton. But as far as the first-timers go, I know Eli, when you look at the resume, it's not impressive. Yes, we could talk about the 2 Super Bowl wins and the 2 Super Bowl MVPs. He's going to get in, and I'm not going to argue that. But is he a first ballot Hall of Famer? If you ask me, he is not. Because the numbers stack up, I get it. With his passing numbers, I believe he's in the top 10, bottom rung of that, as far as touchdowns, passing yards, etc. But as far as just overall, he's a 500 quarterback. I believe his record is 116 and 116. And yes, you cannot take away the Super Bowls, the MVPs, etc. And I believe lifetime in the postseason, he's 8-5. And those 2 Super Bowl runs were magical, to say the least. We could break those down until we're blue in the face. So no need to do that. He's going to be a Hall of Famer one day. If it's me, he's not a first ballot. Absolutely not. He is not a guy, despite the fact, the pedigree of his last name, that right away, yep, you got to throw him in there. He's never won an MVP. He's never been an All-Pro, first team or second team. And yes, I understand he's got the numbers and the hardware. No argument there. But is he a first ballot lockdown Hall of Famer? Not in my eyes. Luke Kuechly. He's a guy that's been a 7-time All-Pro, 5-time first team, and 2-time second team. To me, it's more about the first team All-Pros. That's just me being a small guy room, a hard marker. And he's been in the league 8 years before he retired. If 7 of the 8 years you are a first or second team All-Pro, or let's put it this way, 5 of those 8 years you were first team All-Pro, you're a Hall of Famer. Terrell Suggs. And he was also Defensive Player of the Year. Terrell Suggs, Defensive Player of the Year. But he's a guy that was a first-team All-Pro when he did win his Defensive Player of the Year in 2011. And he was a second-team All-Pro, I believe, in 2008. But 136 sacks, that to me, he's borderline. I don't think he's a first ballot, but he's a guy that's eventually, I think, is going to get into the Hall of Fame. Then you have Adam Vinatieri. He's a lock. Forget about it. He's one of the clutch kickers, if not the clutchest kicker in the history of the league. And with all the Super Bowl rings, to me, he goes in on the first ballot. Earl Thomas was a guy, Legion of Boom, 3-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time second-team All-Pro. To me, he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer. He would have been, and his career fizzled out big time, where he had a falling out there in Seattle, if you recall, flipping off his coach and the sideline there, and then he went to Baltimore that one year, which was actually the year that Lamar Jackson won his first MVP, and did not have a big year that year, and then just faded into oblivion. I know there was some off-the-field stuff that maybe factored into him not getting back into the league, but to me, he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer. And then James Harrison, 2-time first team, another former Defensive Player of the Year, 2-time second team All-Pro, 86 sacks, I believe, for his career. Was a dominant force, but again, didn't have the consistency year in, year out, and was certainly a game-wrecking player. Definitely had his moments, and he was a Steeler. And this is coming from yours truly. Not a first ballot Hall of Famer. Maybe somewhere down the road he may get in. I'd be shocked if he gets in here on the first ballot. So that's what you have with the NFL. Let me turn my attention to the college sport. And I will say this. I know that these Tuesday night, 7 p.m. or 8 p.m., whatever it is on ESPN, when they have the selection committee show to give you the latest as far as where these teams stack up and what the matchups would be like if the season ended today. And I understand it's theater. It's the buildup of, all right, where they're going to shuffle the deck here and see where they're going to put this team, that team, what seed, who's number one, who's this. Now, we know Oregon is number one. There's no surprise there. But how they put together the teams and the matchups, I understand that winning a conference championship is vital to getting one of those top 4 seeds. But I would think when you take a look at this bracket right now, they're going to have to do something about this. It's almost similar and to, I would think, a notch below it, because when you look at Major League Baseball and you talk about the reseeding, and I understand it's a little bit different. It's apples and oranges, totally get it, where teams are going to have to reseed. So for instance, when the Mets won their wild card, they should have been playing the Dodgers because they were the 6th seed, the Dodgers were the 1 seed, and they should have played them in the division series. But because they don't reseed, the Mets were able to play the Philadelphia Phillies in the divisional series, and the Phillies were a 2 seed, so therefore they matched up well against them, and we saw what happened to where Philly was ousted. And if you recall, the 2 years prior, where the Phillies had to play the Braves and knock them out of the postseason, where if they reseeded, they wouldn't have played the Atlanta Braves. So my point is, and I get it that it's a little bit different, it's apples and oranges. So if you're saying, Jay Reels, what are you doing? But hear me out on this. So now you have a scenario where your top 4 seeds in the country, as of right this very moment, are the following. Oregon, lock, no problem there. Texas, Miami, and Boise. So here's the issue that I have when it comes to the conference championships. And this is as of right now. Obviously that could change here, as we know, as the season unfolds. When you look at the other teams that are 5 through 12, how is it, Georgia, and I get it that they just won a big game and they put themselves back into the college football mix, playoff mix. How is it that Georgia, could you imagine if Georgia goes ahead and plays, let's say Texas? We know that Georgia smoked Texas already. And I understand that you want to award these teams that win conferences to get a bye. Understood. But it is going to be a disaster when you're going to have these matchups down the road. So let's just say if Georgia, and let me just pull up the bracket here real quick. Let me see if I can do that. If it's a scenario where Georgia, let's say they're going to rematch against Texas, and that's no fault to the system because that's how it's working right now. That's how it's going to be. But I wonder, as this gets more traction as the years go on, they're going to have to revamp this. And I understand that if Georgia's 11th, you can't put them as a 2 seed, or you can't put them higher than where they're at right now. But if you're going to have a rematch with Georgia and Texas, even though Texas is going to have that layoff, but to me, that's going to hurt them more so than help Georgia play in a first round, because they've already beaten them, and now they're going to have to play them, all right, back in Texas again. And I understand that may be tough to beat a team twice in their building in a matter of, 2 months? But the advantage is going to go to Georgia there, because they've been there, done that, and Texas, they can talk about, well, hey, we have another shot, which they do. But how I look at it is that the team that they're going to play that may not be deserving based on the fact that their strength of schedule, and even though that they deserve to win their conference by getting a bye and having that week off, but to me, that's going to be a disadvantage for these teams. And even for a case like, let's say, I know Penn State is not up there. They're up there as far as the 6th seed, and they would play Georgia, by the way, which that would just be a bloodbath if you ask me. But that's the way the system is, and that you cannot argue or even discount. But when you have teams that are going to be up there, even Miami for that matter. So let's just say, for argument's sake, one more time, let me just pull this up here. You're going to have a scenario where, let's just say, Ohio State, BYU, 5-12. Chances are they're going to play the 4 seed in Boise State. Now, that could be a competitive game, and that's fine. But then you have a scenario where, let's just say, Penn State and Georgia, I believe right now they're going to play the 3 seed, and that would be Miami. You mean to tell me that if Georgia, Miami, that is going to be no contest? And I understand they have a Heisman Trophy candidate in a one Cam Ward, but they did just recently lose to Georgia Tech, and it's ironic because their last game of the season, Georgia's going to play at home to Georgia Tech. But the point of the matter is that you're going to have these matchups in the second round where you would salivate if it was one of those top few teams. Let's say if Georgia was ranked number 2, or if a team like Alabama was also up there, or even Ohio State for that matter. But you're going to have in the second round, whether it's Texas, Miami, Boise, I'll give you a little slack because at least they were competitive against Oregon in a loss earlier this year. So they know what it takes to play against a big-time team. Miami that hasn't played a big-time team. Same for Texas, notwithstanding Georgia, even though they are in the SEC, but it's not as if Texas has played Alabama. It's not as if they played, off the top of my head, did they play LSU? I don't even think they played LSU this year, or even Ole Miss for that matter. So the only barometer that they have throughout the course of this year was Georgia, and chances are if they play them again, they're probably going to get smoked. So, one more time. This is the first year of this, and I don't think they're going to revamp this based on if a team that's going to win a conference championship, they're going to deserve to get the bye. All right. But I wonder if this is going to make for intriguing football when you get to December and even into January, where you look at the bottom 12, and you can look at Alabama historically here. You can look at Ohio State. You can look at Georgia. Would you be surprised if those 3 teams end up being part of the Final Four? Absolutely not. Where you can look at Oregon, all right, you would think they'll be there, but Texas, Miami, Boise, they could be out. And people are going to argue whether or not those teams were deserving to be in the top 4. That is just my case in point. And we're going to have to see. I get it. You still have 3 more weeks left of the season, including the conference championships. No ifs, ands, buts, babies about it. Let's see where the dust settles, what the selection committee is going to bring at that time. And then we could certainly take that 30,000-foot view and dissect what these matchups are going to be, how this is going to play out. But I would think, I believe as early as 2026, they're going to expand to 14 teams. Now, does that mean they're going to revamp it then? That remains to be seen. I thought it was a bit premature for them to increase it from 12 to 14. All right, we understand it's money, it's content, it's adding more layers of drama, intrigue, interest, etc., as we've seen so far this year. And I know I made the comment and had the overall theme of, is the regular season just ruining the college football playoff? At the time, I could say yes, because you're going to have 2 win or 2 loss teams, maybe even a 3 loss team making it. So you're not going to know what's going to happen until you get to the end of the season, which could take away a lot of that drama. But right now, as we're getting deeper into it, it's certainly building up a lot heading into these final couple of weeks. So I'll have to retract that. Now, if it was a thing where it was a foregone conclusion that you have a lot of no-loss teams and 1-loss teams where it looks like you're going to have your top 12 automatic. That would have been different. But because you have 2-win teams and maybe even 2-loss teams, and you may have a 3-loss team maybe sneak in if you're Georgia. So that will have to really take a big giant look at once we get past the season and get ourselves ready for the bowls, and certainly have a better perspective when it comes to that. But right now, it's not as if the regular season has been destroyed here based on what transpired there 3-4 weeks ago. So that's what happened with the college football. And yes, Tennessee and SMU right now currently out. Obviously, Tennessee losing the other day, as we know, to Georgia. And yes, are they worthy of being a top 12 team? Absolutely. And I think they probably will end up in the top 12 based on just all the craziness that we've seen in college football here over the last few weeks. All right, now let me turn my attention now as I put on the high tops, get to the NBA. And yeah, let me just put this out there right now. The Cavaliers, Celtics, a couple nights ago, 15-0, went into the TD Garden, and it was looking like a no contest there in the first half as the Celtics built a 21-point lead. Made a ton of threes, 22 for the game, but they shot the lights out on the ball in the first half to get that big lead. And then Cleveland, they chipped away, cut it to 2, but the Celtics were able to prevail, 33 points, 12 rebounds for one Jason Tatum, as the Celtics survive and win 120-117. And then last night, Cleveland on a back-to-back beat the Pelicans, I believe, last night, to where they get back on the beam, 16-1 to start off the year. What more can you say? As I've said before, and I'll say it again, way to respond there against a depleted Pelican team. But with Cleveland, the question is going to be, is this going to be sustainable? No, not to the standpoint of them being whatever it is. They're on a pace to win, I guess, if you break it down, let me see, off the top of my head, they could be, 75-7 when it's all said and done? And we know that's not going to happen. But are they going to be a team that's going to be neck and neck with the Celtics from here on out? Now, to me, that's the big question. Because a lot of the other teams in the conference, I know the Knicks have played a little bit better. Orlando, without their best player, in my eyes, and the one Paolo Banchero, they've actually played pretty well. We could go over even the other teams that are supposed to be up top, whether it's Milwaukee, Philadelphia, which I'll get to in a second. Those teams look like they're going to be either fading out to sea or will have to be on that uphill climb to try to get to a 3 or 4 seed, them being Milwaukee more so than Philadelphia. But is Cleveland going to be there for the long haul in the regular season? To me, that's the big question. And I understand injuries could pop up at any point, but are they going to be in a battle royale with the Celtics all year for a 1 seed? To me, they probably will be. I could see them fading at some point, but chances are they're going to be a 2 seed when it's all said and done, because of the way the standings are in the Eastern Conference. It really is the Cavs, Celtics, and everybody else. And as it is, they currently have 2 in the loss, but they do have a 3-game lead over the Celtics, and then the Celtics have a 3-game lead over the Knicks. So it's pretty much going to be those 2 teams battling it out from this point forward, unless something drastic happens to where the Knicks, Magic, even Miami for that matter, they start to play better until the point where they move up the standings and try to threaten the aforementioned Celtics and Cavs. Now, let's talk about what's happening in Philadelphia. And I hate to go there because I know if you've listened to the podcast over the years, you know that there have been a handful of players that have gotten on their case, and rightfully so. I do not have a vendetta. I do not have a personal affront against these couple of players that I'll bring up here. But James Harden, who I've gotten on his case, and even as recent as last week, and Joel Embiid, because these are guys, as we all know, they are or have been all-world NBA players, more so Harden than Embiid. And Embiid, as we all know, an MVP 2 years ago, all the injuries coming out of Kansas, etc. But to me, I always thought of him as a front-running type of player, a guy that I recall back in 2018 down 3-0 was mocking the Celtics, and where Marcus Morris had to go to Embiid to point to the scoreboard and say 3-0, 3-0, because the Celtics were up 3-0 in the series. And you would think that after winning an MVP, being a little bit more mature, and knowing that it's about winning a championship, that he finally got his MVP trophy. I guess a lot of the bantering with he and Jokic, I deserve to be the MVP, and him trying to lobby and try to be a shill for a guy that should be the best player in the league as far as it being official and getting the hardware for it. Well, now you have a scenario where his teammate called him out in a one Tyrese Maxey, and kudos to Maxey. I give it up. He's a guy that got his big-time payday this offseason. His max deal, whatever it was, 5 years, $202 million. And for Maxey to call out not only the former MVP, but one of the big-time players in the sport, for him to say that, yeah, this guy's late for everything. I'm sure he's probably even late for lunch. And that's how bad it is with Embiid. Meetings, practices, who knows if he's missing team flights or is showing up late for team flights where the plane is on the tarmac and it's been there for about 10 minutes and, oh, wait, where's Joel? What's going on here? So kudos to Maxey. And even Maxey said that, hey, that's my guy. He's my brother. He's showed me a lot. He's taught me a lot about this league. But come on. So I got to give it up for what Maxey's done. And he's a guy that certainly is not a bum, far from it. He is a very good player, borderline great player, and he's young and got his bag, and I'm sure he's just going to only improve from here. So now Embiid is put on notice, and the first thing I thought about when that came out a couple of days ago, is Joel Embiid a guy that you could trust to be a leader of this team? And you know what the big answer is to that? A flat-out resounding no. Like my former radio partner, my blood, my cousin JD. And I don't want to put him in the category of Dwight Howard. I won't do that. But I will say this. What my cousin JD said about Dwight Howard many years ago, more so in his days in Orlando, when he was unable to come through, and he was another guy, front runner, would want to egg on the crowd or try to, when he was at home, if they were up by 20, he would smile and wave his hands and all the gyrations and histrionics. But when they were down and losing, that went out the window. But what he said about Dwight Howard then, which you could almost kind of say for Joel Embiid now, he is not a leader of men and he is not to be trusted. I think for Embiid, he's more not to be trusted, especially with his health, because his body's breaking down. And I talked about this a couple of days ago, and I'll reiterate it quickly here. Embiid, he could slim down all he wants and stay away from the fast food restaurants and the milkshakes and soda and whatever. He could cut all that out. And yes, he could get into strength training and he could be in the trainer's room, stretching out, yoga, this, that, and the third. But if his cardio and his flexibility is out of whack, maybe he needs to incorporate the TB12 method. Who knows? But until he starts to get on that, where his limbs, and maybe he's doing that. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not in the locker room. I'm not in the gym with him, etc. But with these knee issues and everything that has happened, and I know he's a big lumbering guy, but you would think he needs more cardio, more running in his life, more stretching, and not just your typical stretching or having the masseuse do that. Maybe he needs to call Alex Guerrero or Tom Brady to say, hey, what can I do to have some longevity playing in the sport that I love? He's going to need to do that because you can't trust this guy to be on the court. And even when he's on the court on one leg, he's still 50% better. 50% of him is better than 100% of a lot of guys in the league. But the whole point of the matter is he has to stay on the court. And it's to him to be at his optimum best, not just at 50%. He has to be close to 100% in order for the Sixers to get to where they want to go. And then you hear the news last night that Paul George has tweaked his knee, or I believe his hamstring, which was the same one that held him out the first, 5-6 games of the season. So now he will probably be back on the shelf. So now you have a situation where Embiid, who has played, Maxey's been out with a hamstring issue. Now George is out. The Sixers are 2-12. I picked them as an under, and thankfully that's going to look good again 2 years running because I picked them last year and they were an under. But this Sixer team is a flat-out abomination. There's no way to cut it, and it starts with your best player. And he's going to have to start showing up, and he's going to have to start showing out and putting some belief in his team to know that I'm the guy, I'm the face of this organization. And for all that bluster that he talked about a couple weeks ago, oh, everything I've done for this city, and oh, I put my body on the line. Nobody's questioning that, putting his body on the line with the orbital bone fractures and his foot and his knee. That's fine. But yeah, what I've given to the city of Philadelphia, well, guess what? You need to give a little bit more because you're getting paid a king's ransom to play basketball and you're doing, I understand whatever it takes to get on the court, but guess what? Part of being great, part of being that guy, part of being the face of the franchise is showing up, is playing. Do I need to go back to the days of that Michael Jordan quote, or not even a quote? Do I have to go back to that and how playing every game was as if it's his last? I'm going to do it. The hell with it. The back end of that three-peat, 96 to 98, they played a total of 304 games throughout that run. Regular season, playoffs, finals. How many games did Michael Jordan miss? 0. And I get it. He is a different bird. He is a beast unlike we've ever seen. And I'm not trying to say that he's got to play in every single game. But guess what? He's got to play more than 30. He's got to play more than 40. And yes, Jay Reels, what could you say? His body's breaking down. He's this, that, and the third. Well, do your best to get back out there. And I understand he's been playing now, so that's fine. But, Joel, be a leader. Be the first one in, the last one out. Don't be the last one in, the first one out. Because that is not a good look for your team. So that's all I got there. I mean, I could go forever with that. Now, as far as the rest of the league, what else do I have here before I turn my attention to other things? Yeah, pretty much in the sport, everything is status quo. And we know that's going to be the case as we continue to move on this NBA season. What I have here, as of late, I know LeBron is getting off of social media, as you saw. I know there's been some memes about lies. I don't know. To me, that's neither here nor there. I don't get into all that nonsense. But for, Sixers 2-12, they're last in the East, actually below the Wizards, Raptors. That's when you know you're having a bad season. And granted, I know they haven't been whole. We know the whole deal. Warriors in first place, 11-3. And I'm actually surprised how they played. I have to give it up to them. Lakers have now won 6 in a row as they look to try to get themselves to the top. They're currently a game behind the Warriors in the standings, sandwiched in between Oklahoma City at 12-4. And I understand, as much as I hate the Lakers, it's good that the Lakers are up there. They've been hovering, as we know, between the 7 and 10 seeds with the whole playing scenario the last 2 years. And granted, 2 years ago, they did go to a conference final. But with them being where they're at right now, I'm sure the rest of the league is going to take notice here. Phoenix just goes to show, even Kevin Durant at 36 years of age, as you know, he's going to be out or has been out. I don't know when he's going to be coming back. You would think maybe in the next week or so. But in his absence, they started off 9-2, and since then they've lost 5 in a row, including to the Knicks last night. So I guess that's something that's newsworthy there. But other than that, that's what you have there with the association. Now let me turn my attention to the National Hockey League as I lace up my skates, and let's see what we got there. Overall, not much. I know Winnipeg bounced back nicely after losing those 2 games in Florida, and they had a home-and-home against the Panthers there to where they won 6-3 there the other night, and they got off to a big start. I believe they got off to a 3-0 lead to get themselves off and running before they went on to win. Now, the big news here, and a couple of things. You also had a coach that was fired, but Alexander Ovechkin, 2 more goals the other night against the Utah Hockey Club, and in the game, he suffered a leg injury on a collision. It was leg to leg. The extent of it, who knows right now? He's on IR, so he's going to miss at least 3 games. He's week to week. Now, with the 2 goals he got the other night, he's now 27 away from breaking Wayne Gretzky's all-time goal-scoring record of 894 goals, and who would have thought? But for the great one, or excuse me, the great 8, the great one is Wayne Gretzky, but they call Alexander Ovechkin great 8. That's the number he wears. Now, this puts a little wrinkle. Who knows how long he's going to be out? He is 39 years of age, and for the most part, his career, he has been indestructible. But is this going to be a lingering issue, even when he's healthy? Is this going to be something that's going to slow him down a little bit? And that, we don't know as of this very moment. So for Ovechkin, let's hope he gets back there soon. He was on pace to break Wayne Gretzky, and he does lead the league in goals at 15. He was on pace to break his record sometime in February. So now, is this going to be delayed to the latter part of the month? Is it till March? Is it till April? The season does end middle to the latter part of April. But again, hopefully this is not going to linger. This is not going to be one of those things where he's going to really have to fight through it throughout the rest of the year. Similar to, let's just say, if I want to tantamount to, let's say, a high ankle sprain in football and basketball, where you know those suckers never heal, especially in season. Is this going to be a leg issue where he's not going to be able to have this fully heal until the end of the season? Now, that we won't know. The extent of it, we're not going to know, because obviously a lower body injury, that could mean he could have, who knows what it is. Now, unless it's broken, if that's going to come out, and as of right now, that's not the case, thank goodness. But with Ovechkin 27 goals away and him being on pace to break it, this is going to delay it, obviously. And the big question is, how long is this going to be delayed? That remains to be seen, but he's going to be week to week. 3 games he'll miss. So I will certainly be on top of that. But then you had Jim Montgomery fired, Boston Bruins, and that was just going to be tough sledding for him. Think about it. 2 years ago, they had the best record. They broke records, as I've mentioned time after time here when we've talked about the National Hockey League, with the regular season and point totals, and they lost in the first round to the Panthers. Last year, yes, they did make it to the playoffs, but didn't do much there. And with an 8-9-4 start, got the axe. Don't even know who the interim is, and I should know who that is. Let me find out real quick. But for Montgomery, and think about this, the year that they won had all those records, the team that won the Stanley Cup that year was the Vegas Golden Knights, which was coached by Bruce Cassidy, who won the Stanley Cup there for the Bruins back in 2011. And yes, the head coach is Joe Sacco, who was a former player there in the National Hockey League dating back a couple of decades ago. So for Joe Sacco, that's S-A-C-C-O, let's see if he's going to inject any life or boost this team. And we understand they've also had some injuries, more so on the back line, as we talked about there a couple weeks ago. But the Bruins right now kind of going through it. And let's see if they could rally the troops and get themselves back in the mix as far as the Eastern Conference and the Atlantic Division goes. And speaking of the Atlantic Division, Auston Matthews, another key injury. He's been out and now is in Germany, I believe, trying to get some more treatment or look at a specialist. I don't know if this is going to mean a plasma-rich platelet situation. Now, he did suffer an upper body injury. Who knows if it's a shoulder, an elbow, a chest injury. So we're going to have to wait and see when that's revealed over time. But they flew with the team physicians to meet a specialist in Germany. So who knows how that's going to play out. And we know that a lot of these players over the years, whether it's Kobe Bryant, that comes to mind, the late great one, how he went overseas to get platelet-rich plasma. Maybe that was for his Achilles when he tore that back in 2013. But for Matthews, that's a big loss. And the Maple Leafs have played pretty well here in his absence. So it's not as if that he's been a huge loss. Think about it. They've actually overtaken the Panthers here for first place in the Atlantic. So even with a game in hand that the Panthers have, but kudos to what Toronto has done here. And with Matthews, let's see if he could get back in the mix here at some point. Probably he's going to be out for a couple more weeks, you would think. Who knows how long this treatment's going to have to settle in, and obviously with some rehab, and then he's going to have to skate, contact, etc. So we will be sure to see when Matthews returns, since he's been out since the 3rd of November. But other than that, nothing else to really get into with the National Hockey League. Those are the two big stories with Ovechkin and Matthews, and of course to throw in Montgomery, him being fired as well. Let me take a quick look at the schedule here for the next few days, and both the NHL and NBA. Your schedule tonight, ton of games. Carolina at the Devils. All right, if you want to sink your teeth into that, two teams that are battling it out for the top of the Metropolitan Division. Colorado at Washington. No Ovechkin, but you have Colorado coming in, and I know they have their own injuries to boot. Other than that, Florida at Chicago. I know it's the ESPN game tonight, so you get Bedard against the champs. And Minnesota at Edmonton. Minnesota's played very well there in the Northwest Division, so you got to give it up for what they've done. Is that called the Northwest Division? I should know that. I'm thinking NBA right now. It is the Central. My apologies there. I got NBA on the brain still, so that is an error on my part. My apologies. Utah, they're in Boston tonight, so if you want to see what's going to happen there with the new coach. Winnipeg at Pittsburgh. All right, Winnipeg, the hottest team, going up against Crosby and company. Saturday, Chicago at Philly. Yeah, other than that, Colorado at Florida, if you want to throw that in there. Dallas at Tampa, Utah at Pittsburgh, Jersey at Washington, Sunday, you only have one game, Utah at Toronto. So that's going to be your NHL schedule over the next few days. NBA, tonight you have nothing really to speak of. I mean, if you want to watch Orlando at the LA, the Lakers, only because Orlando's played pretty well there in the East. Golden State, New Orleans, Dallas at Denver, those are ESPN games there tomorrow night. Indiana, Milwaukee, you're not going to have a lot here. That's why the NBA season is long. I know Christmas Day, that's going to be the one where you're going to look at as that being the extravaganza, even though the NFL Netflix, that's going to get swallowed up by that. There's 2 games that day, if you know, Baltimore, Houston, Kansas City at Pittsburgh. But Saturday, Detroit at Orlando, I mean, yeah, you have games that, Houston's played pretty well, but they're playing Portland on Saturday. Sunday, Minnesota at Boston, that's a 3:30 game. All right, that's one you can look at. Dallas at Miami. Clippers in Philadelphia. I mean, you really don't have a lot to speak of when you're talking about the NBA schedule here over the next few days, but that's what you have. And then to wrap up with baseball, and there's a couple of things here that we could discuss. I know no surprise with the awards so far. I know my bad on Monday, I said Jackson Merrill and Jackson Chourio, and I thought Chourio was going to win. How in the hell did I overlook Paul Skeens? That is an awful job by yours truly, so hand raised high in the air. And I did have a little mea culpa on my YouTube channel at JReels if you didn't notice that. But with Skeens and Luis Hill, all right, I guess he's your Rookie of the Year, fine. You didn't have a ton of players. I know Austin Wells' teammate. And then you also had Colton Cowser from the Orioles. Maybe not a good rookie class, but all right, Hill wins. Stephen Vogt and Pat Murphy, Guardians, Brewers are your managers of the year. I know Carlos Mendoza was third behind Mike Schilt. At the end of the day, who cares? Chris Sale, Tara Skubal are your Cy Young Award winners. And tonight, to me, the only issue is, do both MVP candidates that are going to win, and one Aaron Judge and Shohei Ohtani, do they win unanimously? Does Lindor get a first place vote? Does Bobby Witt get a first place vote? That we'll have to wait and see. But other than that, it's a foregone conclusion that both of those guys are going to win your MVP. But the big picture here, I'm going to put a lid on this right here, right now. I don't want to hear any more rumors. I don't want to hear about any more discussions. I don't want to hear about, oh, this is the team that's in the lead. Oh, well, wait a minute. Now there's a dark horse team. Oh, wait a minute. Now, although it hasn't been confirmed, but so-and-so is going to offer Juan Soto X amount of years at X amount of dollars. So I'm putting this to rest right now. Wake me up when Juan Soto has signed on the dotted line, or it's official that he's signed with this team for this amount and for how many years. That is it. I'm not going to uncover this any more than right this very moment. Because we heard about the discussions that he's had this week where Hal Steinbrenner said, oh, we had a good session, didn't reveal too much, feels, do we have a shot? He's pretty much hoping. He's not going to say, oh, yeah, I think we do. Obviously, he didn't discuss numbers or years for that matter. But with the Yankees meeting up with him and even the Dodgers also meeting up with Boris, Soto, and whomever his entourage may be, and with the Dodgers meeting up with him, now we all know that if he goes to the Dodgers, I mean, why watch baseball next year? No, I'm kidding, of course. But no, if he does happen, for whatever the reason, let's say he does take a little bit less money. And what I mean by less money, he's not going to take $300 million. But let's just say he gets a 12-year, $600 million deal, and I understand they're going to scratch for every nickel, dime, penny, etc. And that's how the negotiations are, from what we see or from what we have read or heard, that he's going to bilk every team for that last dollar. But considering the Dodger payroll, but we know the pieces in place. We know who are the players on the roster. And if you add Soto to that mix, he may say, you know what? I want to go to LA. I know what it's like living in San Diego with the weather. I have a shot to win every year. They have a great farm system. You know what? I want to take $600 million, or maybe if the Mets offer $650, can I take $625 from the Dodgers? And if the Dodgers say, yeah, we'll get you for $625, would I be surprised if he goes to LA? Absolutely not. Do I think he's going to LA? I don't think he will. But all that leads up to just this one little theory that I have, which is moot right now. But you know what? I'm throwing it out there just for receipt's sake. As you've heard throughout the course of this podcast, check the receipt. This will be a scenario that if Juan Soto goes to the LA Dodgers, this will be equivalent to when Kevin Durant left Oklahoma City for the Golden State Warriors. Now, granted, Juan Soto may not be the best player in the sport. And I understand that at the time, Kevin Durant may not have been the best player in the sport. That was LeBron James. But we know that he's a top 2 or 3 player, just like Soto is arguably a top 5 player in the sport. And if he does happen to leave New York to go to LA and to be a part of a team, and here are the parallels. Soto being the top free agent on the market, similar to Durant back in 2016. Now, granted, I understand the Warriors had a record-setting year, which they lost in the NBA Finals to the Cavaliers that year. But he's going, Soto, if he does happen to go to the Dodgers, he's going on a team that's already loaded. He's going on a team that's won a championship. And I understand that the Warriors didn't win the championship that year, the same summer that Durant said, "The hell with it, I'm taking my talents to the Bay Area." I get that. But the parallel, one more time, best free agent this year, the best free agent that year. Going to the best team. And even though the Cavs were the best team based on them winning the championship, but what happened in the subsequent years? And I get it that it took Durant to put them over the top to win those back-to-back titles. But it's not as if the Warriors never won a title prior to that, because we all know the Warriors did win the championship the year before they lost to the Cavaliers. So he's going to an already made team, a team that he saw with his own eyes win right in front of him. And now he's going to, all of a sudden, I don't want to say all of a sudden, but now he has an opportunity to sign with the Dodgers, to play with them after they lost to them. Similar, another parallel to Kevin Durant losing to Golden State, where Golden State went to a championship. I understand they lost, but he did go to a team that was already built to win multiple championships. And he was just the final piece. Where Soto, not to say that he'd be the final piece, because they already had the piece to win, but in essence, he will be a Kevin Durant. Because your lineup, your top 4, will be probably even better than Murderer's Row. When you have Ohtani, Betts, Freeman, and now Soto? I mean, what more can you say? But where Soto, I think, is going to end up when it's all said and done, I think it's going to be the Mets. And I'm not saying that because I'm a Met fan, but I think Steve Cohen, he didn't get Yamamoto last year. And I understand last year was supposed to be that rebuilding year, that transition year. But now it's time to put the stakes even higher. But my point is, and I talked about this a couple weeks ago with Cohen, Soto can't be the end-all be-all. If he does happen to get him and the Mets can rejoice and get the early Christmas gift, he's got to add to that rotation. He's got to add to that bullpen. He needs a center fielder. He's probably going to need a first baseman if Pete Alonso isn't going to come back. So the work is only beginning if they get Soto. And that's what I will say if the Mets do get him. And if you ask me again, I think he's going to go there. Is there another team laying in the weeds? Could it be Toronto? Absolutely, it could be Toronto. Could it be another team that's in a big market? The Cubs? Could it be San Francisco? Could it be whomever may? Right, because they have resources. They have what it takes. They are able, and although they haven't probably met with Boris and Soto, but they can put forth a significant contract that could be comparable to what is out there or what has been discussed or rumored, etc. But guess what? Those teams haven't come out. I don't know who they are, what the offers are. So as of right this second, that is it. I'm not saying anything more about Juan Soto until Soto signs. And I understand there could be a hot and heavy rumor the day that I put on this microphone, and I may have to bring it up, but I'm going to do my best to refrain from it. Because if it's just going to be conjecture, if it's just going to be, oh, this is what I've heard, or oh, this could happen as early as tomorrow, let it happen first, and then I'll talk about it. Because until then, I'm zipping it. And one last thing, I just have to throw this out there, because this is me just nitpicking and just being a pest, but I'm sure I'm in the big minority, but I'm tired of these teams renaming their stadiums. And here's another case, and I get it. They have 20-year agreements or however long it may be. But the Houston Astros, who at first, remember they were at Enron Park, and we know what happened there. That whole thing blew up. and they had to pivot and transition, which I totally understand. That is one case where, all right, fine. We know what happened there 20 some odd years ago. So they pivoted from Enron Park or Enron Field to Minute Maid Park. Minute Maid, that's where they're at. They're located. All right, no problem. Now, the naming rights of the stadium, although Minute Maid, I guess, is going to have some influence in there, but they have, I guess, there was a disagreement, or maybe they decided that, no more, that we're going to have Minute Maid Park as the name of our ballpark. It is now going to be called Daikin Park. D-A-I-K-I-N. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And I couldn't even tell you what Daikin is. I guess it's another local, whatever it is. For all I know, it sounds like a moving company. And that's not to diminish or disparage them. But Minute Maid Park is no longer or no more. It is now Daikin Park. So you're going to have to get used to that. Just like with Staples converted to Crypto.com and New Era Park was now Highmark Stadium up in Buffalo. And we can go through all these stadiums that have these changes. The arena in Miami, which was just a mess. And I just had to throw that out there because just brutal, disgusting. I don't want to hear it. And then one last thing before I go, I just saw this here. Similar to the NFL, your first ballot Hall of Famers are on the ballot the first time. Ichiro, CC Sabathia, Felix Hernandez, Carlos Gonzalez, Dustin Pedroia, Hanley Ramirez, Fernando Rodney, Ian Kinsler, Ben Zobrist, Troy Tulowitzki, Russell Martin, Brian McCann, Adam Jones, and Curtis Granderson. The only person on that list who is a slam dunk, and if you ask me, is going to be going into the Hall of Fame, is Ichiro. Came here at 27. I get it, he's a singles hitter. Very good outfielder, the great arm that he had, and he was always a threat when he was on the base paths. But he does have 3,000 hits, mainly for Seattle, but he did play in the Bronx with the Yankees and ended his career in Miami with the Marlins. But to me, he's a Hall of Famer. CC is borderline. I understand he has a lot of numbers. We could talk about that down the road. But to me, he's not a first ballot. Not in my eyes. King Felix, a dominant pitcher in his own right. A guy that certainly was Hall of Fame worthy, but he fell off like a cliff at the end of his career. Remember, went to Atlanta for that 1 year. I didn't even think he made it out of spring training. Carlos Gonzalez, nice player, not a Hall of Famer. Dustin Pedroia, I know he's won multiple World Series. I know he won an MVP in 08, but he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer or even a Hall of Famer for that matter. Hanley Ramirez, not a Hall of Famer. Fernando Rodney, I know he got a ton of saves, but played on a million teams. Rays, Tigers, not a Hall of Famer. Rangers, I believe. Ian Kinsler, Ben Zobrist, no way. Troy Tulowitzki, had Hall of Fame talent, but injuries curtailed that career. Russell Martin, good catcher, not great. Brian McCann, good catcher, not great. Good hitter. Adam Jones, good outfielder, not great. Curtis Granderson, good guy, good player, power, not a Hall of Famer. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode just about the books. Thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, and review on all of the podcast platforms, or one of them, the one you listen to the most, Apple, Spotify, of course, YouTube, at JReels, as I post on there. Not only daily shorts, even some lifestyle vlogs, get a little taste of JReels outside of the realm of sports. Please subscribe there, people. I would sincerely appreciate it. And of course, if you want to hit me up with any questions, comments, or suggestions, you could do so at the following: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JReels Podcast, Twitter, JReels1, just the number. The old-fashioned way, the JReels Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, as I like to say, talking sports since birth. Quitting my 9 to 5 9 months ago to pursue this full time, to try to earn a living, blaze a trail, carve a path. That's right. Independent podcasting at its finest. I'm a one-man operation team. Well, I'm a one-man operation, people. A one-man team, one-man band, trying to do it all. Not only produce, write, edit, host a podcast, but also social media, market, advertise, try to lure whatever brand, partnerships, sponsorships, etc. Holla at your boy, people. I'm doing my best to try to get it all out there, and I will continue to deliver whenever I'm in front of this mic or this camera, to deliver nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JReels Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, to the South Pacific, and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the J Reels podcast, on the flip, baby.